I have Jewish friends who grew up thinking that Jesus was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Christ. The Messiah had to come and begin his mission before the Second Temple was destroyed. If he's not our Messiah, we have no Messiah.
For 2,000 years, history went silent about Jesus' life until an ancient Iranian text resurfaced. For centuries, historians have puzzled over one of the greatest gaps in biblical history: the missing years of Jesus' life. The Gospels remain silent for nearly 2 decades, leaving room for speculation, legends, and unanswered questions. But now, a 2,000-year-old Iranian manuscript, long overlooked and rarely discussed, is forcing scholars to re-examine what we think we know, and what may have been intentionally left out. Watch till the end, because this discovery raises questions history never prepared us to answer. The greatest mystery in Christian history. The story of Jesus Christ has shaped billions of lives across 2,000 years. We know about his miraculous birth in Bethlehem. We read about his powerful ministry that changed the ancient world forever. We understand his crucifixion and what Christians believe about his resurrection. But here's something that puzzles historians, religious scholars, and everyday believers alike. The Bible goes completely silent about Jesus for almost 2 decades of his life. Think about that for a moment. The most influential figure in Western civilization simply vanishes from the historical record between the ages of 12 and 30. That's 18 years without a single mention in the canonical Gospels. No stories, no teachings, no miracles. Nothing. The Gospel of Luke gives us one brief glimpse of a 12-year-old Jesus debating with temple teachers in Jerusalem, astonishing them with his wisdom and understanding. His worried parents found him there after searching for 3 days. Then the text tells us he returned to Nazareth and grew in wisdom and stature. And that's it. The next time we see Jesus in the biblical narrative, he's suddenly 30 years old, ready to begin his ministry. This enormous gap has fascinated people for centuries. Where was Jesus during these lost years? What was he doing? Who was he learning from? These questions have spawned countless theories, legends, and claims throughout history. Some suggest he worked quietly as a carpenter in Nazareth, learning his trade from Joseph. Others propose more adventurous possibilities. Could Jesus have traveled to distant lands? Did he study with mysterious teachers in faraway places? The absence of information has created a vacuum that human curiosity desperately wants to fill. Modern scholars generally believe Jesus probably stayed in Galilee, working as a craftsman. The Greek word used in the Bible is tekton, which could mean carpenter or builder. In first-century Jewish culture, sons typically learned their father's trade, so this explanation makes practical sense. But the lack of concrete evidence leaves room for speculation. And throughout history, that speculation has produced some remarkable stories and controversial manuscripts that claim to fill in these missing years. The Turkish discovery that shocked the world. In the year 2000, Turkish authorities made a discovery that would eventually capture international attention. During an anti-smuggling operation in Turkey's Mediterranean region, police seized an ancient manuscript from a gang involved in illegal antiquities trading. The smugglers faced serious charges, including illegal excavations and possession of explosives. Among the confiscated items was a leather-bound manuscript that experts believed could be between 1,500 and 2,000 years old. The manuscript sat in an Ankara courthouse for 8 long years. Nobody knew quite what to do with it. The leather pages were fragile, covered in what appeared to be Syriac script written in gold lettering. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic, which was the language Jesus himself would have spoken. The discovery remained relatively unknown until 2012, when the manuscript was transferred to the Ethnography Museum of Ankara under heavy police escort. When news broke about this ancient text, media outlets around the world ran sensational headlines. Some claimed the Vatican was in shock. Others suggested this discovery could shake the foundations of Christianity. The manuscript was valued at an astonishing $28 million. Even photocopies of single pages were supposedly worth millions. But what made this manuscript so controversial wasn't just its age or its value. It was what people claimed it contained. According to various reports, this could be a copy of the Gospel of Barnabas, a text that presents a very different account of Jesus' life than the 4 canonical Gospels in the Bible. This particular version allegedly claimed that Jesus was not crucified, but instead ascended to heaven alive, with Judas Iscariot being crucified in his place. It reportedly called Jesus a prophet rather than the Son of God. Some versions even mentioned Muhammad by name, suggesting Jesus predicted the coming of the Islamic prophet. Understanding the Gospel of Barnabas. To understand this Turkish manuscript, we need to talk about the Gospel of Barnabas itself. This text is not some newly discovered ancient document. Scholars have known about versions of the Gospel of Barnabas for centuries. The earliest confirmed manuscripts we have are written in Italian and Spanish, dating from around the 15th and 16th centuries. That's medieval times, more than 1,000 years after Jesus lived. The Gospel of Barnabas is roughly as long as all 4 canonical Gospels combined. It contains 222 chapters and about 75,000 words. The text claims to be written by Barnabas, who in this account is presented as one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. The opening declares it to be the true gospel of Jesus, called Christ, a new prophet sent by God to the world. The author criticizes those who call Jesus the Son of God, and specifically mentions Paul the Apostle as an impostor who preached false doctrines. The content of the Gospel of Barnabas harmonizes many stories from the canonical Gospels, but adds Islamic elements. It denies Jesus' crucifixion, rejects the concept of the Trinity, and portrays Jesus as a prophet who foretold the coming of Muhammad. These elements have made the text popular in some Islamic circles, though many Muslim scholars themselves reject it because it contradicts the Quran in several important ways. The Quran, for example, clearly identifies Jesus as the Messiah, while the Gospel of Barnabas claims Muhammad is the Messiah. Christian scholars have extensively studied the Gospel of Barnabas, and nearly all reject it as an authentic first-century text. The manuscript contains numerous historical and geographical errors that someone actually living in Jesus' time would never make. For instance, it places Jesus' birth during Pontius Pilate's rule, but Pilate didn't become governor until 26 AD. It describes Jesus sailing to Nazareth, even though Nazareth is not a coastal town. The text mentions wine being stored in wooden barrels, a practice that didn't become common in that region until centuries after Jesus. The problems with the Turkish manuscript. When experts began examining the Turkish manuscript more carefully, serious questions emerged about its authenticity. Language specialists who can read modern Syriac found obvious and significant grammatical errors in the text. These weren't minor mistakes that might come from copying an ancient document. They were fundamental errors that suggested the author wasn't truly fluent in the language they were supposedly writing in. Even more revealing, some researchers claimed the manuscript actually contained a colophon stating it was written in the year 1500 of our Lord. If true, this would mean the document itself declares it was created in 1500 AD, not 1500 years ago. This is the kind of detail that completely changes everything. A 500-year-old manuscript claiming to be 1500 years old is very different from an actual ancient text. The Vatican did request to see the manuscript, but this was likely out of scholarly curiosity rather than fear or dismay. The Vatican and other Christian institutions regularly study ancient manuscripts and archaeological discoveries. It's part of understanding religious history. the sensational headlines about the Vatican being shocked or in awe appear to be exaggerations. Reputable news sources and biblical scholars expressed significant skepticism about the manuscript's authenticity from the very beginning. Experts noted that the manuscript doesn't match the style of genuine 6th century codices. It doesn't use the materials that writers from that era would have used. The Syriac writing shows signs of someone who is barely literate in the language. All these factors point to the same conclusion. This Turkish manuscript is most likely a much later creation, probably from around the 16th century, that someone has tried to pass off as an ancient text. It's not the first time this has happened in history, and it certainly won't be the last. The history of lost years, theories. The fascination with Jesus' missing years isn't new. For centuries, people have proposed theories about where Jesus might have traveled and what he might have learned. These theories often tell us more about the people proposing them than about historical reality. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, several writers claimed Jesus traveled to India, Tibet, or other Eastern lands during his youth. One of the most famous proponents was a Russian journalist named Nicholas Notovich. In 1894, he published a book called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. Notovich claimed that during travels in Ladakh, India, he discovered ancient manuscripts at the Hemis monastery. These texts allegedly described how Jesus, called Isa in the documents, traveled to India as a teenager, studied with Buddhist and Hindu masters, and absorbed Eastern wisdom before returning to Palestine. Notovich's story was compelling, but it quickly fell apart under scrutiny. When other travelers and scholars visited the Hemis monastery, they found no trace of the manuscripts Notovich described. The monks at the monastery denied ever showing such documents to Notovich or anyone else. Some historians questioned whether Notovich even visited the monastery at all. Most scholars today consider Notovich's account to be fabricated, though some defenders claim the monastery might have hidden the texts after his visit. Despite the debunking, similar stories continued to surface. In the 1920s, Russian explorer Nicholas Roerich claimed he heard legends about Jesus traveling in India and Tibet. In 1908, an American preacher named Levi Dowling published The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, claiming the information was channeled to him from the Akashic Records, a supposed cosmic database of all events in history. This text described Jesus' extensive travels throughout India, Persia, Egypt, and Greece, learning from masters in each location. What scholars actually believe? While these exotic theories make for fascinating stories, modern mainstream scholarship takes a much more conservative approach. The vast majority of recognized biblical scholars and historians believe Jesus spent his lost years in Galilee, probably working as a carpenter or builder in Nazareth or nearby towns. This conclusion isn't based on any dramatic discovery. It's based on understanding the cultural context of first-century Judaism. In Jewish society during that time period, sons typically learned their father's profession. Jesus' father Joseph was a tekton, a craftsman who worked with wood and stone. It would have been completely normal for Jesus to spend his teenage and young adult years apprenticing under Joseph, learning the family trade. The Gospel of Mark specifically refers to Jesus as the carpenter, suggesting people in his hometown knew him in this role. The age gap between 12 and 30 also makes sense in Jewish religious tradition. 13 was the age of bar mitzvah, when boys officially became men in Jewish law. 30 was considered the age of full maturity and readiness for religious leadership. So the biblical narrative jumps from Jesus as a religious student to Jesus as a religious teacher, skipping the years when he would have been working and living as a regular member of his community. Scholars like Paula Fredrickson emphasize that there is no historically reliable evidence placing Jesus outside first-century Palestine during these years. Marcus Borg states plainly that suggestions of Jesus traveling to Egypt, India, or other distant lands are without historical foundation. John Dominic Crossan notes that none of the theories attempting to fill these years with exotic travels have gained support from serious scholarship. The simplest explanation remains the most likely. Jesus lived and worked in Galilee during this period. The Dead Sea Scrolls connection. Some theories about Jesus' lost years involve the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived in the Judean desert. This idea gained traction after the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947. The scrolls contained religious texts from around the time of Jesus, and they revealed information about the Essene community at Qumran. The Essenes practiced strict religious discipline, lived communally, and maintained their own interpretations of Jewish law. The connection to Jesus comes through John the Baptist. There's evidence suggesting John might have been influenced by or even trained among the Essenes. Since John baptized Jesus and clearly had some relationship with him, some researchers proposed that Jesus might have also spent time studying with this desert community. One of the Dead Sea Scrolls even mentions a messianic figure that some interpret as possibly referring to Jesus. However, this theory has significant problems. The teachings of Jesus as recorded in the Gospels differ substantially from Essene theology in several key ways. Jesus ate with sinners and tax collectors, something the purity-focused Essenes would have condemned. Jesus engaged actively with society rather than withdrawing into isolated communities. His teachings about God's love and forgiveness don't match the rigid, judgmental tone of many Essene texts. While it's possible Jesus was aware of the Essenes, most scholars don't believe he spent significant time with them. The more likely scenario is that Jesus was familiar with various Jewish groups of his time, including Pharisees, Sadducees, and possibly Essenes, but that he developed his own unique teachings. The Gospels show Jesus debating with Pharisees frequently, suggesting he was well-versed in their interpretations of Jewish law. This knowledge could have come from his education in Nazareth and his regular participation in synagogue life, without requiring him to join any specific sect or travel to distant monasteries. The British Connection Theory. Another persistent theory claims Jesus traveled to Britain during his youth, possibly accompanying his great-uncle Joseph of Arimathea, who some legends describe as a merchant involved in the tin trade. This idea is popular in British folklore and was famously referenced in William Blake's poem, Jerusalem, which asks, "And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green?" The theory suggests that Joseph of Arimathea, who the Gospels mention as the man who provided his tomb for Jesus' burial, was a wealthy trader who traveled to Cornwall for tin. He supposedly brought his young relative Jesus along on these journeys, exposing him to Celtic culture and possibly even building a church at Glastonbury. Various British legends support this story, and some local traditions claim Jesus visited specific sites in England. However, there is zero historical evidence supporting this theory. The idea of Joseph being a tin merchant doesn't appear in any early Christian writings. The Glastonbury legends don't emerge until many centuries after Jesus' time. Archaeologist Dennis Price has written about investigating these claims, but mainstream scholarship dismisses them as later medieval inventions designed to give Britain a special connection to Jesus and early Christianity. The tin trade did exist, but there's no evidence Joseph of Arimathea was involved in it. Like the India theories, the British connection tells us more about British cultural identity than about historical reality. Every culture wants to claim a special relationship with important religious figures. These stories serve important purposes for the communities that tell them, but they shouldn't be confused with documented history. The archaeological and textual evidence simply doesn't support Jesus traveling to Britain, no matter how romantic the idea might seem. Why the Gospels are silent. Understanding why the canonical Gospels don't mention Jesus' teenage and young adult years helps put this whole mystery in perspective. The Gospel writers weren't trying to write comprehensive biographies in the modern sense. They were writing theological documents with specific purposes. Each Gospel was designed to present Jesus as the Messiah and explain the significance of his ministry, death, and resurrection. The Gospel of Mark, probably the earliest Gospel, moves quickly from Jesus' baptism by John directly into his active ministry. Mark isn't interested in childhood stories or lost years. He wants to show Jesus as a powerful teacher and healer who announced God's kingdom. The Gospel of Matthew includes birth narratives and the story of the Magi, but then jumps to John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus' ministry. Luke includes the most childhood material, including the temple incident at age 12, but even Luke then skips forward to Jesus' baptism. These gaps don't represent hidden secrets or suppressed information. They reflect the author's purposes. Ancient biographies often focused on the significant public actions of their subjects rather than providing complete, chronological accounts of every period of life. The Gospel writers cared about Jesus' teachings, miracles, conflicts with authorities, crucifixion, and resurrection, because these elements formed the foundation of Christian faith. His teenage years working in Nazareth, however meaningful to his personal development, didn't serve the theological points they wanted to make. It's worth noting that the Gospels also skip over many other periods in Jesus' ministry. They don't provide day-by-day accounts of everything he said and did. The Gospel of John explicitly states that Jesus did many other things that aren't recorded, and if they were all written down, the world itself couldn't contain all the books. This selective approach was normal for ancient religious and biographical writing. The silence about the lost years isn't suspicious. It's exactly what we would expect. The cultural context of first-century Galilee. To understand what Jesus was probably doing during the lost years, we need to understand life in first-century Galilee. Nazareth was a tiny village, probably containing only a few hundred people at most. Archaeological excavations have revealed small houses, agricultural terraces, and evidence of simple living. This wasn't a cultural center or a place of great learning. It was a rural, working-class community where most people struggled to survive. The Gospel of John includes a dismissive comment from Nathanael when he first hears about Jesus. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? This reflects Nazareth's insignificant reputation. People living there would have been farmers, herders, and craftsmen. They would have spoken Aramaic in daily life, though some might have known enough Greek for trade purposes. Life revolved around agricultural seasons, religious festivals, and family obligations. Just 3 miles from Nazareth was Sepphoris, a much larger city that was being rebuilt and expanded during Jesus' youth. Some scholars suggest Jesus and Joseph might have found construction work there, helping build houses and public buildings for wealthy residents. This would have exposed Jesus to more cosmopolitan influences, including Greek language and Roman culture, without requiring him to travel to distant lands. The proximity of Sepphoris to Nazareth offers a reasonable explanation for how a young man from a tiny village might have gained broader knowledge of the world. Understanding this context makes the scholarly consensus more sensible. Jesus didn't need to travel to India to become educated. He had access to synagogue schools. He could have worked in larger towns nearby, and he was clearly a brilliant student of Jewish scripture and tradition. The 18 missing years weren't necessarily filled with dramatic adventures. They were probably filled with work, study, family life, and the gradual development of the remarkable teacher who would emerge at age 30. Similar forgeries throughout history. The Gospel of Barnabas and the Turkish Manuscript aren't unique. Throughout history, people have created documents claiming to reveal hidden truths about Jesus. These texts range from honest attempts to fill narrative gaps to deliberate forgeries designed to support particular theological positions or make money. Understanding this pattern helps us evaluate new discoveries more critically. The Gnostic Gospels, discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, are genuine ancient texts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. However, they weren't written by Jesus' original disciples. They represent later theological movements that reinterpreted Jesus' message through mystical and philosophical lenses. Scholars value these texts for understanding the diversity of early Christianity, but they don't provide reliable information about the historical Jesus. More recently, we've seen cases like the Gospel of Jesus' Wife fragment that generated headlines in 2012. Harvard professor Karen King presented a tiny papyrus fragment containing Coptic text where Jesus seemed to refer to my wife. This sparked enormous controversy and media attention. However, subsequent investigation revealed the fragment was almost certainly a modern forgery. The papyrus itself might have been ancient, but the text was written recently using materials and techniques that experts could identify. These incidents reveal important truths about how we evaluate historical documents. Age alone doesn't make something authentic. Even genuinely ancient manuscripts might contain later additions or changes. Scholars must examine writing styles, materials, language use, historical accuracy, and consistency with other known texts. They must consider who benefits from the document's claims and what motives might exist for fabrication. This careful, skeptical approach protects us from being deceived by forgeries, whether ancient or modern. What we can actually know about Jesus. Despite all the uncertainty about the lost years, scholars have actually assembled a substantial amount of reliable information about the historical Jesus. This knowledge comes from careful analysis of early Christian writings, references in Jewish and Roman sources, and archaeological discoveries. The picture that emerges is of a real person who lived in a specific time and place, even if many details remain unclear. Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the reign of Herod the Great, probably between 6 and 4 BC. He grew up in Nazareth in Galilee. He was baptized by John the Baptist around age 30. He gathered disciples and taught throughout Galilee and Judea, probably for about 3 years. His teachings focused on God's kingdom, love, forgiveness, and challenges to religious authorities. He was arrested and crucified by Roman authorities under Pontius Pilate, probably in 30 or 33 AD. The existence of Jesus as a historical person is accepted by virtually all legitimate scholars, including non-Christian historians. The evidence includes Paul's letters written within 20 years of Jesus' death, the Gospels written within 40 to 70 years, references from Jewish historian Josephus, and mentions by Roman historians like Tacitus. This is actually a substantial amount of evidence by ancient standards. We have better documentation for Jesus than for most other figures from 1st century Palestine. What we don't know with certainty includes many details about his appearance, his personality, his private thoughts, and yes, what he did between ages 12 and 30. These gaps are frustrating, but they're common when studying ancient history. The absence of information doesn't mean something suspicious happened or that churches are hiding secrets. It simply means the available sources didn't record those details. Being comfortable with historical uncertainty is part of understanding the past honestly. The story of the 2,000-year-old Iranian Bible and Jesus' lost years reminds us that history is complex and often incomplete. While the Turkish manuscript probably isn't the ancient revelation some hoped it would be, the questions it raises remain fascinating. Where was Jesus between ages 12 and 30? Most likely, he was in Galilee, learning his trade, studying scripture, and preparing for the ministry that would change the world. Not as exotic as traveling to India or Tibet, but probably closer to the truth. What do you think happened during Jesus' lost years? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.